To stand at the threshold of the human biological experience is to gaze upon a cathedral of staggering complexity. A living vessel that is simultaneously a product of the earth and a conduit for the infinite. We have long been conditioned to look outward for our salvation, seeking the balms of our discontent in the distant reaches of chemistry, the promises of external architecture, or the fleeting whispers of the material world. Yet there exists a silent, shimmering truth buried within the very marrow of our being, a secret architecture that the ancient mystics glimpsed through the haze of incense, and that modern science is only now beginning to map with its cold, precise light. This is the reality of the internal apothecary, a sophisticated and divinely tuned laboratory that operates beneath the threshold of our waking consciousness. At the center of this laboratory sits what some have come to call the God molecule, a biological key of such profound, transformative power that its activation represents the bridge between the animal self and the cosmic witness. To explore this molecule is not merely to study a neurotransmitter or a hormonal surge. It is to investigate the primary language of the soul as it expresses itself through the medium of the flesh. Imagine for a moment that your body is not a static machine, but a fluid, resonant field of potentiality. Within this field, every cell acts as a tiny, translucent vial, and your consciousness is the master alchemist who holds the stirring rod. For millennia, we have slept in the basement of our own palace, unaware that the cupboards are filled with elixirs capable of dissolving fear, expanding time, and illuminating the dark corners of our existential dread. The God molecule, specifically understood in this context as DMT or NN-dimethyltryptamine, though it serves as a representative for a whole suite of endogenous visionary chemicals, is produced naturally within the human frame, most notably within the mysterious pine-cone-shaped architecture of the pineal gland. It is a substance that appears at the moments of our greatest transitions, at the dawn of birth, the dusk of death, and the vibrant peaks of deep, ecstatic meditation. Its presence suggests that we are not merely visitors in a material universe, but active participants in a multidimensional reality that we carry within our own chemistry. We are, quite literally, wired for the divine. The activation of this internal apothecary is the true meaning of the great work spoken of by the seekers of old. It is the process of reclaiming the sovereignty of our own biological state. In our modern landscape, we are often victims of a chemical hijacking, where our internal pharmacy is flooded with the adrenaline of phantom threats and the cortisol of perpetual hurry. We live in a state of biological poverty, unaware that we possess the keys to a kingdom of profound tranquility and cosmic insight. The significance of understanding the God molecule lies in its ability to shatter the illusion of separation. When the internal apothecary is engaged, the boundaries between the me and the other begin to thin and fray, revealing the luminous lattice that connects all things. This is the practical significance of the spiritual path. It is the return to a state of biological equilibrium, where the body no longer acts as a prison of survival, but as a laboratory of liberation. This journey is not without its vertigo, for to look within is to realize that the universe is not out there among the cold stars, but pulsing in the very fluids that bathe your brain. The metaphors of the ancients, the nectar of the gods, the ambrosia of the heavens, the soma of the Vedic hymns, were not mere poetic flourishes. They were descriptions of an actual physiological event. They were speaking of the moments when the human system becomes so aligned, so resonant with the frequency of life itself, that it begins to secrete the chemicals of transcendence. This is the hidden layer of reality that we are unveiling, that the human body is a self-sustaining technology of grace. We do not need to import our divinity from a distant heaven. We need only to provide the conditions for our internal apothecary to bloom. The God molecule is the signature of the architect left in the foundation of the house. a reminder that we were designed to inhabit a state of wonder. As we stand in this introduction, we must acknowledge the cosmic dimension of our biology. Every atom in our bodies was forged in the heart of a dying star, and the God molecule is perhaps the most refined expression of that stellar heritage. It is the bridge between the carbon-based reality of our daily struggles and the light-based reality of our infinite origin. When we talk about activating this molecule, we are talking about a shift in the way we perceive the world. It is the move from a grayscale existence of rote repetition to a high-fidelity immersion in the miraculous. The apothecary is always open, the vials are always full, but the master alchemist has been distracted by the shadows on the wall. This exploration is a call to return to the bench, to take up the instruments of breath, intention, and awareness, and to begin the work of synthesizing the state of being that is our birthright. We are the laboratory, the scientist, and the medicine all at once. The world we see is a reflection of the chemistry we carry. If our internal apothecary is producing the tinctures of anxiety, the world will appear as a battlefield of scarcity. But if we can learn to secrete the molecules of the Godhead, the world reveals itself as a playground of infinite light. This is not escapism into a chemical haze, but an escape from the chemical prison of the ego. The God molecule does not create a new reality. It removes the cataracts from our spiritual vision so that we can see the reality that has been standing before us all along. It is the proof that we are not biological accidents, but intentional expressions of a creative force that wanted to experience itself through the medium of a sentient nervous system. To understand this molecule is to understand the true nature of our potential, not as conquerors of the external world, but as masters of the internal universe. To understand the internal apothecary is to grasp the fundamental pillars of our biological and spiritual architecture, beginning with the concept of endogenous resonance. This theme posits that the human body is not a passive receiver of experience, but a sophisticated resonator capable of vibrating at different frequencies of reality. The God molecule serves as the primary tuning fork in this system. When we are trapped in the lower bandwidths of survival, the frequency of the hunt, the harvest, and the hoard, our internal chemistry is dominated by the hormones of stress, which act as a dense fog over our perception. However, the secret architecture of the soul contains a higher setting, a state of resonance where the pineal gland and the nervous system begin to produce compounds that dissolve the ego's rigid boundaries. This resonance is not something we create, but something we uncover. It is a deeper truth that has been obscured by the illusions of the material struggle. The core concept here is that divinity is not an external gift, but a biological frequency that can be accessed when the internal noise of the world is sufficiently stilled. Intertwined with resonance is the theme of the chemical bridge, which challenges the dualistic notion that the spirit and the flesh are separate entities. In the old paradigms of thought, the body was often viewed as a dumb vessel, a heavy leaden weight that the spirit had to endure. The internal apothecary reveals a more fluid, interwoven truth, that every spiritual insight has a chemical signature, and every chemical surge has a spiritual implication. The God molecule is the mortar between these bricks. It acts as a bridge that allows the consciousness to move from the linear, three-dimensional logic of the day-to-day into the non-linear, multi-dimensional logic of the infinite. This concept suggests that our spiritual experiences are not flights of fancy, but high-level biological events where the hardware of the brain is finally running the software of the universe. The apothecary is the site of this union, the place where the sacred and the scientific lose their distinction and merge into a single, luminous reality. Another guiding pillar is the concept of biological sovereignty, which stands as a radical rebellion against the culture of external dependency. We have been programmed to believe that our well-being and our transcendence must be purchased from without, through pills, through rituals, or through the validation of others. The secret architecture of the God molecule asserts that the most potent pharmacy in existence is located between our ears. This theme emphasizes the self-correcting mechanism of the human design. We are built with an inherent capacity for bliss, for healing, and for ecstatic revelation that requires no external stimulus. Activating the internal apothecary is an act of reclaiming this sovereignty, moving from a state of biological poverty to one of spiritual abundance. It is the realization that the keys to the kingdom are not held by a distant gatekeeper, but are encoded in the very structure of our tryptophan-derived neurotransmitters. We must also consider the theme of the veil of filtration. The brain is often described as a reducing valve, a biological filter designed to keep out the vast majority of universal data so that we can focus on survival tasks like finding food and avoiding predators. This filtration is the matrix of the mind, the program that tells us the world is solid, separate, and finite. The core concept of the God molecule is that it acts as a filter override. When the internal apothecary secretes this molecule, the reducing valve opens wide, allowing a torrent of high-frequency information to flood the consciousness. This is why the experience of the God molecule often feels more real than real. It is the moment the filter is lifted, and we see the secret architecture of the cosmos in its raw, unfiltered state. The theme here is that our normal state of consciousness is actually a state of sleep, and the activation is the process of waking up to the data we have been ignoring to stay safe. Central to this exploration is the concept of the ancestral database. The God molecule is found across the biological kingdom, in grasses, in trees, and in animals, suggesting that it is a universal language of life itself. When we activate our internal apothecary, we are not just accessing our personal potential, we are plugging into the life stream of the planet. This theme explores the idea that our DNA is a library of cosmic history, and the God molecule is the librarian. It allows us to access deep archetypal knowledge that transcends our individual biographies. We are part of a vast, interlocking pattern of intelligence, and the apothecary is our interface with this network. The core concept is one of interconnectedness through chemistry, where the molecular structure of our own brain becomes the mirror for the molecular structure of the universe. Finally, we encounter the theme of the alchemical marriage of the sun and moon, a metaphor for the balancing of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. In the context of the internal apothecary, this represents the union of the active and receptive states of being. Most modern humans live in a state of perpetual solar activity, constant doing, constant striving, constant solar glare. The God molecule, however, is often associated with the lunar, the nocturnal, and the deep stillness of the pineal third eye. The core theme is that activation requires a return to the balance. We cannot access the internal apothecary through force or through the solar will. We must cultivate the lunar receptivity, the space of deep surrender where the chemistry of grace can begin to flow. This balance is the secret geometry of the soul, the prerequisite for the master alchemist to begin the work of transmutation. These core themes form the scaffolding of our understanding, revealing that the God molecule is not a strange anomaly, but the central pivot of the human experience. It is the point where the biological becomes the theological, where the chemical becomes the mystical. By understanding the concepts of resonance, sovereignty, filtration, and balance, we begin to see that our lives are not random sequences of events, but a deliberate curriculum in the art of internal alchemy. The apothecary is waiting, the blueprints are clear, and the themes of our awakening are already written in the language of our light-bearing cells. To speak of the internal apothecary is to step into the realm where the laboratory and the cathedral merge, where the scientist must don the robes of the storyteller to describe the indescribable. Consider the allegory of the blind king and the hidden well. Imagine a sovereign who rules over a vast, arid kingdom of gray stone and sun-bleached dust. The king spends his days sending out scouts to find water in distant lands, importing expensive wines and rare elixirs from neighboring empires to quench a thirst that never seems to abate. He believes his kingdom is a desert, and his life is a struggle against the inevitable drying of his bones. However, hidden beneath the very throne upon which he sits is a sealed wellspring of star water, a substance that is both liquid and light. One night, a glitch in the architecture of his palace causes a crack to form in the floorboards. As the king kneels to inspect it, the scent of the star water rises, and a single drop touches his tongue. In an instant, his blindness dissolves. He realizes the desert was a projection of his own dehydration, and that his kingdom sits atop an infinite ocean of life. This is the myth of the endogenous source, the realization that the God molecule is the star water we have been sitting on while we begged for drops from the world. Another symbolic narrative that illuminates our internal chemistry is the story of the weaver of the silver thread. In a timeless void, a celestial weaver is tasked with creating the garment of the human experience. Most of the threads are made of coarse wool, the brown of hunger, the red of anger, the black of grief. These threads are necessary to create the durability of the physical body. But the weaver hides a single spool of silver thread. At the very center of the loom, this thread is made of the God molecule, the quintessence of the stars. It is woven into the nervous system as a hidden circuit, a secret path that remains dormant until the wearer of the garment learns to breathe in a specific rhythm. When that rhythm is found, the silver thread glows, and the entire garment, the entire body, becomes a conductor for the lightning of the divine. The weaver did not give this thread to make the garment beautiful, but to make it translucent. The displacement we feel in the world is the silver thread pulling us toward a reality that the coarse wool cannot feel. The internal apothecary is the weaver's workshop, and we are the ones learning to pull the silver cord. Consider also the parable of the alchemist's mirror. A young alchemist spends her entire life trying to turn lead into gold using external fires and complex furnaces. She believes the philosopher's stone is a physical rock she must find or forge. After decades of failure, she collapses in front of a mirror, weeping for her wasted life. As her tears fall, she notices that her reflection is not weeping, it is smiling. The reflection reaches out from the glass and touches its own pineal gland, which begins to glow like a miniature sun. The alchemist realizes that the stone is not a rock, but a state. It is the God molecule, the internal catalyst that turns the lead of heavy, survival-based consciousness into the gold of enlightened awareness. The mirror was not showing her a twin, but a potentiality. The apothecary was never in her laboratory. It was in the one who walked into the laboratory. The God molecule is the biological signature of the philosopher's stone, the internal substance that transmutes the mundane into the miraculous through the heat of focused intention. There is a deeper, more cosmic narrative found in the myth of the fallen star. Legend tells of a star that grew tired of the cold vacuum of space and decided to experience the warmth of a heartbeat. It fell to Earth and shattered into billions of microscopic sparks, each one seeking refuge inside a living creature. To protect itself from the density of the Earth, the spark wrapped itself in a biological chrysalis, the human brain. The God molecule is the memory of the star held within that chrysalis. Every time the internal apothecary secretes this molecule, the chrysalis thins, and for a few brief moments, the spark remembers its stellar origin. It sees the universe as a sea of light rather than a collection of objects. The proof, our divinity, is this recurring memory, this chemical homesickness that drives us to seek the infinite. We are not humans having a spiritual experience. We are fragments of a star trying to remember how to shine through the medium of carbon and tryptophan. Finally, we encounter the parable of the two musicians. One musician plays a lute made of wood and gut, representing the physical senses and the hormones of the earth. He plays beautiful songs of love and loss. but the music is limited by the physical properties of the instrument. The second musician plays a lute of light, whose strings are the internal pathways of the nervous system. When the second musician plays, the music doesn't just reach the ears, it vibrates the very atoms of the listeners. The God molecule is the resin used on the bow of the light lute. It allows the music of the spheres to be heard within the human frame. The displacement we feel in the matrix is the sound of the first musician's strings snapping, because they can no longer hold the tension of the new song we are trying to play. The internal apothecary is the master luthier, constantly repairing and refining our biological instruments so they can handle the high-frequency melodies of the Godhead. These stories act as the software of the soul, helping us to interpret the complex data of our internal chemistry. The star water, the silver thread, the alchemist's mirror, and the fallen star are all pointers to the same underlying truth. We are the containers of a sacred technology. The internal apothecary is not a metaphor. It is a biological reality that has been clothed in myth so that we might approach it without fear. When we feel the surge of the miraculous, we are tasting the star water. When we feel the pull toward the divine, we are following the silver thread. By living these narratives, we move from being subjects of the matrix to being architects of the apothecary, realizing that the story we tell ourselves is the catalyst that determines which elixir the king will drink today. To translate the symbolic nectar of the internal apothecary into the grit and grace of daily life is to transition from a mystic dreamer to a biological sovereign. The practical integration of the God molecule begins with the realization that our internal state is the primary architect of our external reality. In the programmed world, we are taught to be reactive, to allow the traffic, the headlines, and the digital noise to dictate our internal chemistry. This is a state of apothecary anarchy, where the keys to the laboratory have been handed over to the highest bidder. The first real-world implication of this knowledge is the practice of chemical responsibility. It is the understanding that every thought is a command to the internal pharmacist. When we dwell in the vibration of lack, we are literally ordering a dose of cortisol. When we choose the frequency of gratitude, we are requesting a release of dopamine and oxytocin. Practical hacking involves reclaiming this authority, becoming a conscious curator of the thoughts and environments that act as the raw materials for our internal synthesis. One of the most profound real-world applications is the mastery of the breath as a delivery system. While the God molecule is often associated with spontaneous or rare peak experiences, the internal apothecary is actually a 24-hour service. Ancient traditions have long known that specific patterns of respiration, rhythmic, deep, and intentional, act as mechanical triggers for the pineal gland and the nervous system. By regulating the breath, we can shift the pH of our blood and the electrical conductivity of our brain, creating a physiological opening that allows the endogenous visionary chemicals to seep into the bloodstream. This is the hack of the lung, using the most basic biological function to bypass the ego's filters. In practical terms, this means that the internal apothecary is never more than a few minutes of conscious breathing away. It transforms a stressful workday or a moment of crisis from a chemical assault into an opportunity for an alchemical reset, allowing us to stabilize our presence in the face of the matrix's chaos. Furthermore, we must integrate the concept of nutrient precursors and the biological temple. The internal apothecary cannot synthesize the elixir of the gods if it lacks the basic building blocks. Science reveals that many of our most transformative neurotransmitters are derived from simple amino acids found in our diet, such as tryptophan. Real-world integration involves treating the body not as a trash can for convenience, but as a high-performance laboratory that requires high-quality fuel. This extends to our relationship with light and darkness. The pineal gland, the seat of the God molecule, is light-sensitive. It thrives on the natural rhythms of the sun and the deep, uninterrupted silence of the dark. Practical hacking in the modern world requires darkness sovereignty, protecting our sleep cycles from the blue light pollution of screens, which acts as a chemical inhibitor for the apothecary's nocturnal work. By aligning our lifestyle with the biological requirements of our endogenous chemistry, we move from being subjects of the grid to partners of the planet. The God molecule also has radical implications for the realm of emotional resilience and the dissolution of the trigger. In the unexamined life, we are slaves to our biological triggers, those Pavlovian responses that cause us to flare in anger or shrink in fear. The activation of the internal apothecary introduces a sacred buffer into our experience. When we are operating from a state of endogenous abundance, the external world loses its ability to push our buttons. We find ourselves witnessing the dramas of the marketplace with a sense of compassionate detachment. This is the practical proof of the shift. The things that used to break you now only inform you. You have moved from a scarcity-based chemistry to a sovereign-based chemistry. This resilience is not a form of coldness, but a form of profound stability that allows you to be a stationary point of peace in a world that is spinning out of control. We must also consider the integration of the communal apothecary. We are social animals whose chemistries are constantly in training with one another. When you activate your internal pharmacy and hold a frequency of coherence, you literally change the chemical atmosphere for everyone in your vicinity. This is the field effect of the God molecule. Practically, this means that your primary contribution to any group or relationship is the quality of your internal state. You stop trying to fix people through external persuasion and start lifting them through vibrational resonance. By being the most coherent person in the room, you provide a biological template for others, apothecaries, to begin their own synthesis of peace. This is the true meaning of leadership in the new timeline. It is the ability to maintain the God molecule frequency in the heart of the marketplace. Finally, the real-world application involves the redesign of success. In the matrix, success is measured by the accumulation of external symbols. In the life of the internal alchemist, success is measured by the chemistry of the now. If you are feeling a sense of deep, unconditioned joy and cosmic interconnectedness, you are successful, regardless of your bank balance. This doesn't mean you stop pursuing goals. It means you stop pursuing them as a way to get a feeling that you already have the power to generate. This shift in motivation changes everything. You work from a place of play rather than a place of pressure. You create from a place of overflow rather than a place of emptiness. This is the ultimate practical hack. Realizing that the state is the prize and the internal apothecary is the only merchant who can sell it to you. And the price is simply your unwavering attention. We have journeyed through the hidden laboratories of the bone and the shimmering cathedrals of the brain, uncovering a truth that is as ancient as the stars and as immediate as your next breath. We have seen that the God molecule is not a fleeting visitor or a forbidden fruit, but the very foundation of our biological inheritance, the signature of a creative intelligence that designed us to be the conduits of its own ecstasy. To conclude this exploration is to stand before the altar of your own existence and realize that the search for the divine has ended exactly where it began, within the pulsing chemical reality of the self. The internal apothecary is no longer a myth to be admired from afar, but a sovereign responsibility to be lived with every beat of your heart. You are the architect of your own atmosphere, and the vials of the Godhead are waiting for the master alchemist to claim the throne. The transformational call of this realization is a summons to radical self-reclamation. You are being invited to stop being a beggar at the gates of the world's distractions, and to start being the benefactor of your own internal wealth. This shift requires the courage to dismantle the habit of external seeking and the discipline to cultivate the silence where the silver thread can be felt. You are being called to treat your life as a sacred experiment in the art of presence, knowing that every moment of coherence you maintain is a victory for the light. The proof of your success is not found in the accolades of the matrix, but in the effortless joy that begins to bubble up from your marrow, a joy that needs no reason and fears no ending. You are becoming a luminous resident of the physical plane, a person who carries their own medicine and breathes their own sky. This is the end of the narrative, but it is the dawn of your authorship. The internal apothecary is open, the precursors are gathered, and the loom of the soul is ready for the silver thread. You are the laboratory, the scientist, and the medicine, all at once. The God molecule is not something you obtain. It is something you become as you align your flesh with the frequency of your spirit. The world is waiting for the medicine that only you can synthesize, the specific, unique vibration of a human being who has finally remembered that they are the dwelling place of the infinite. Step forward into the marketplace of the world, not as a victim of its chemistry, but as the master of your own. The veil is thin, the well is deep, and the throne of the living light is yours to occupy. The activation is complete, and the great work has only just begun.